Hey everybody, Rose Matter here. Welcome to part one of the last of the answer arcs and the last arc of the main series. This is Matsuribayashi. Hopefully, I've said that correctly. And I'm saying it's the last of the arcs. I know that the console arcs exist as well, and you guys have been asking if I will play them. I've been looking into them. I've been trying to find out information. The big thing I want to know is how long are they? If they're short, if they're just kind of like little bite-sized pieces, like maybe a couple of hours each, because I believe there are 5 of them. If they're pretty short, maybe I'll do all of them. If they're pretty long, maybe I'm going to just do maybe 1 or 2, because I do want to get to Umineko at some point relatively soon once this is done. So please give me some information about the console arcs and let me know which ones you guys would most like to see. Maybe I'll do a poll and see like which one is the most popular, and maybe I'll do like 1 or 2 of them if they're longer. Anyway, I'm gonna stop babbling. So let's get into the last of the answer arcs here. I believe this one is going to be from Takano's point of view, based on the fact that it's her picture on the little icon there. So it'll be interesting to kind of see where she came from and how she became the person she is. So I'm gonna stop talking. Let's get into it. Let's start this arc. Okay, at least let it end with a blissful dream. Festival accompanying chapter. The riddle you have been entrusted with solving now finally becomes unraveled. What must be done to stop the chain, and what will happen in the ultimate end? It's a showdown between the conclusion you reached and the one I reached. There is no difficulty, you should understand that now. Everyone is entitled to happiness. The difficult part is accepting that. Everyone is entitled to happiness. The difficult part is fulfilling that. I too am entitled to happiness. The difficult part is working out a compromise. Oh yeah, that was the thing that Rika said. Is like she told that poem to Keiichi in the last chapter, I believe. The study was filled with piles of books and papers. In that study, there was a full-figured old man writing something at his desk in utmost concentration. There was also a little girl sorting out papers on the carpet. She almost looked as though she was playing with them, but the serious expression she was wearing made it clear she wasn't.
おじいちゃん、資料の分けっこができたよ。
Oh, this is Mio, right?
ありがとう。
She talked about her grandfather, right? That was the whole reason she told at the end of the last chapter, she was saying like my grandfather was saying things about working hard or something like
さて
that.
さて、どういう結果になったかな？
同じ症例の人がこれだけ集まった。全国平均と比べても明らかに異常なくらい。
Okay, so it was her grandfather that got her into this whole thing.
やはりな。こっちも興味深い論文を見つけたところだ。精神外科と文化についてまとめたものでな。前頭葉に宿主とは別の意志を持った存在があることを予見したものだ。
前頭葉は人間が人間らしくあることを司る部分だよ。
そうだ。人の感情は心が生み出すのではない。脳という名の器官が分泌物を生み出して与える副産物に過ぎ、その脳に特定の干渉をするナノ単位の生命体の集合が存在し、ある命令系統を持つ一つのコロニーに関与したならば。
Oh, so are parasites the cause of the spread of ideology? When ideologies clash, is that because different parasites are competing to expand their habitat? Such a thing. I'm like, I don't know how old she is in here, but I'm just like, man, this is some pretty heavy stuff for a little girl to be getting into.
あるいは教育の分布か、国境の分布か、人種の分布か。我々の世界の異なる文化コミュニティの存在と、その対立の一因は、そういった人の思想に影響を及ぼす微細な生命体の存在にあると仮定している。
Alright, it was, yep, totally her grandpa that sent her down this path.
おじいちゃんと同じことを考えている人が外国にもいたんだね。
もちろんいるとも。可視不可視を問わず。地球上には無数の生命体がいて、その中には宿主の体内に潜伏して共存し、 時には宿主を支配したりすることが広く知られている。そして実際に人体内にその存在をたくさん発見してもいる。にもかかわらず、人体に潜伏しその宿主を支配する生命体の存在については頑なに否定してきた。家庭すらも含めてな。
どうしてだろうね。人間だけ特別な存在のわけはないのに。
それを仮定することはすなわち、意志に基づいた言動や信念を疫学的原因から派生したものと置き換えられて、対処策もそれと同様とみなされる危険があるからだ。
If conflicts in ideology can be resolved through debate, then they're peaceful. But if those conflicts occur epidemically, they become frightening. And if one were to treat bad thoughts or the spread of culture as an epidemic?
中世の歴史に登場するペストなどを想像しなさい。悪い伝染病が大流行する。その患者を強制的に入院させ、完治するまで退院させない。完治できず、そのまま病院で死んでしまうこともある。すると、その死体は焦燥となる。さらに、患者が触れたものまで衛生のため、すべて没収して焼き捨てる。身近の家族にも感染の疑いがあるから、強制的に入院させねばならん。
So they'd hospitalize healthy people over individual ideas?
思想を病気と置き換えなさい。
The rest is the same.
完治するまで退院させない。触れたものは感染の疑いがあるから全て焼き捨てる。
でも思想なんて個人の自由なんでしょ。ペストとは違う。
If an idea was created by parasites, it would be exactly the same as a plague.
つまり思想は治療不可能な伝染病と置き換えられるわけだ。
So you mean anyone with a different idea is treated like they have a disease?
そういうことだ。この考えを延長すると、無差別、そして無秩序な大量虐殺が起こる。そうすると、人類は大規模な粛清を肯定してしまう論調になりかねん。だから、脳内で宿主を支配する生命体を語ることは、今の時代ではタブーになっているのだ。
タブーって？
触れてはならない。だから誰も研究せん。いや、それどころか、脳内に侵入し、影響を及ぼす存在がいると考えることすら忘れられている。万物の長たる霊長類を支配する未知の生命体などいるはずがないと、頭から決めつけている。
なんだかお粗末な話。いないことの証明なんて悪魔の証明。絶対に不可能なのに。
その通り。悪魔がいることを証明することはたやすい。悪魔を連れてくればいいのだからな。だが、いないことを証明することはできん。いないを連れてくることなどできんのだからな。
It's weird because we just know Takano is like a crazy woman, but like here she's just a little girl, right? It's like every evil, I'm not going to say she's evil, or insane adult has to start as a child, a relatively innocent child.
なんだか脳を支配する生命体が自分たちの存在を秘密にするためにその宿主の人間たちを操っているみたい。
It's funny, like even as a kid she's saying these things and it's still pretty like heavy stuff for a child to be saying, but she just has a cute little voice, so it sounds a little less nefarious. Me and my grandfather shared a happy laugh together.
人間も自然界の生き物の一つに過ぎん。食物連鎖の頂点にいるだけで、それをもって神格化された存在であると思い込むなど愚かしいことなのだ。人とてあらゆる微生物やウイルスに支配されうるのだ。その存在が今日まで発見されていないからといって、それをもって存在しないという証拠にはならん。絶対に存在する。必ず存在するのだ。
科学の世界にもたくさん存在が仮定されていて、
So I'm wondering if that's what her big goal was, why she had all those notes. Maybe they were her grandfather's notes and he passed away before he could finish it, and that was her thing, is all this was so that she could finish her father's research, and that's why she's so dedicated to it.
そうだ。それらの過程をした科学者が全て生きているうちに評価を受けられたわけではない。世まいごとだと呆れられ、その正しさを証明できなかった科学者も大勢いたのだ。
でもおじいちゃんは生きているうちに証明されるといいね。
That's totally what it was. Yeah, he didn't get to finish it, so she's like in his honor, she's gonna prove that he was right.
じゃなかったらおじいちゃんがかわいそう。
大丈夫だよ。神様は努力する者を見捨てたりはしない。
That's what he said, right? He said, that's what she said. My grandfather always told me that something about people who work hard
努力は
always
必
pays off in the
ず
end.
いつか結実するのだ。
Yep.
いつかってそれはいつ？
神がいつ降臨されるのかは誰も知らない。それは例えるなら泥棒がいつ訪れるのかわからないように。だから予期せずしてその時を迎えて、不信心であったことに歯ぎしりすることがないよう常に目を覚ましていなさい。
That was something that my grandfather said all the time. Nobody knows when efforts will bear fruit, but it will happen one day. That's why you must always work hard so you have no regrets when the time comes. Your efforts will bear fruit someday. That's what he meant.
でもおじいちゃんが生きているうちに絶対に努力が実る？生きてるうちに認められなかった科学者がたくさんいるのに？
That was such a cruel thing to say, but I didn't mean to be cruel. I had seen how hard my grandfather had been working, and I also knew he wouldn't live forever. I just wanted his work to gain recognition before he died. Do you know of the resurrection of Jesus Christ? Yeah. He was crucified and resurrected after 3 days. You told me about it. How do you think Jesus was resurrected? Didn't he just get up as if he was waking up in the morning? He was buried after his execution, so his body was in the ground. Did he break open the tombstone and crawl out like a zombie? Haha, no. That wouldn't be called a resurrection. The sinners who killed Jesus imagined exactly the same thing. Jesus predicted just before he was executed that he would come back to life after 3 days. The sinners buried Jesus, sealed his tomb, and posted guards to watch over it. But what Jesus meant wasn't that he would resurrect physically. He meant his teachings would be resurrected. After 3 days, Jesus' teachings were resurrected and people regained their belief. The hearts of those who wanted to be shown the proper way revived his teachings. That's what the resurrection of Jesus is all about. He came back to life in the hearts of his believers. Jesus doesn't exist physically on this earth, but he exists in people's hearts. In other words, that's when Jesus became an existence superior to humans. And she also has this obsession with gods, right? So this must be the grandfather kind of instilled that in her too. Even if it's after the author's death.
その偉業は必ずやよみがえる。
I do note there's definitely a lot of audio missing in this. I don't know if hopefully I got the patch installed correctly, but yeah, there's definitely like a lot of areas where there's no voice acting, but that's okay.
その時私の体が朽ち果ててしまっていても、私の存在はよみがえって評価を受けるのだ。
それはおじいちゃんが神様になったということ？
Oh, here's the thing about becoming a god,
そう
right?
だよ。私の研究はいつか必ず認め
And
ら
that's
れ
what she
る。
said about like living in infamy. She'll live forever because of what she did. She'll always exist.
その時、おじいちゃん
Yep,
は神様になれるということなんだよ。
Oh, grandfather, you seem sweet, but the things you're telling her, they did not end up working out very well. I mean, they worked out well for her, but not for basically the rest of Hinimizawa.
だから自分が生きているうちに評価されることに焦る必要はないのだ。その時が訪れるのが私が生きているうちなのか、それは神様にもわからない。だがその日は必ず訪れる。だからその日の訪れを疑うことなく、ひたすらに努力を続けなくてはならないのだよ。
It was very sad to hear my grandfather say his life would end one day. He wasn't ill and he didn't have only a few years left to live. But set next to the average lifespan, his remaining years didn't look like much. The only person left in my life was my grandfather, so I didn't even want to consider what it would be like with him gone. Grandfather must have remembered I didn't like to talk about that subject. With a tender smile, he gently patted my head.
もちろんおじいちゃんも自分が生きているうちに研究を認めてもらいたい。だから精一杯頑張るよ。
私もおじいちゃんが世界中の人に褒めてもらえるようにいっぱいいっぱいお手伝いする。
I purposely didn't mention the before you die part. I caught myself before I said it.
ありがとう。嬉しいぞ。
Grandfather smiled in satisfaction. His research wasn't exactly outrageous. He wasn't trying to uncover the mysteries of the universe. He was only searching for the possibility that parasites could be responsible for human behavior. Nothing more than that. Nothing outrageous. It really wasn't a wild idea. We even had some leads. Hinimizawa Village, Shishibone City, XX Prefecture. The villagers there are possessed by a powerful homesickness. When they are unable to return, they allegedly behave abnormally, as if they are cursed. There are also some bizarre rules in place in the village based on their belief system. When he was working with the military during the war, my grandfather noticed similarities between the people in Hinimizawa and assumed that some kind of existence was responsible for their odd behavior. He'd been researching it ever since then. In the middle of the 20th century, numerous strange diseases were discovered all over Japan. Most of them were caused by infectious parasites, and people started to pay attention to this forgotten field of study. Grandfather's research was simply one of those investigations into such diseases. Therefore, he believed it would be published among other research and attain recognition soon. But if his research didn't bear fruit before his death, I wanted to continue it. I wanted to continue his research. Grandfather taught me, resurrection isn't something that happens physically. It's when your life's work is appreciated. That's what he meant by resurrection. That's when he'll become a god. So when my grandfather dies, he'll still be with me forever. I wouldn't have to be alone ever again. I will always be with my grandpa. Our works will gain recognition and we will both become gods, gaining eternal peace. Oh, so the reason why. It's rooted in something sweet, but so many people died for it, and it's still horrible. I will make my grandfather into a god. I will become a god. Oh, they're gonna make me feel bad for Takano. I'm like, damn. The game's good for that. It's like people that you don't think are going to be redeemable. They're probably gonna make her somewhat redeemable. I will become a god. Therefore, we will be granted eternity. We'll be together forever and ever. Still selfish because all you're thinking about is you and your grandfather at the, at the cost of thousands of lives. Oh, there's that sound. I was looking at the key on a keychain. The key was labeled Hen House, but the lock Eriko was trying to open didn't belong to that door. It should have opened effortlessly. At least that's what was supposed to happen. But it didn't open. I noticed beads of sweat forming on Eriko's forehead. She was the one who came up with this idea. Eriko was starting to panic. The rest of us started to panic too. This only opens the hen house. Let's stop. Let's go back. Shush. We were supposed to be cleaning out the hen house. If they found us back here, if they found out why we were here and why we were trying to open up the lock to the back door, then all four of us would sure to be sentenced to splayed piggy. Ooh, what's that? Doesn't sound good. Don't panic, Eriko. That key opens this lock, right? You already tried it, right? Will you shut up for a minute? This is the right key. It's just hard to open, that's all. She was almost shrieking. Our hearts were pounding loudly. It was as though the sounds of our heartbeats were echoing through the hallway. And at that point, we heard footsteps that didn't belong to a child. Shush! Somebody's coming. The three of us held our breath, but Eriko didn't hear it. She kept fussing with the lock and the key, as if everything would be okay if she could just open the lock. Eriko, someone is coming. Be quiet. I know this is the right key. I'm not dreaming. I already tried it and it opened. Come on, why isn't this working? When this lock is open, we can be happy and we can say goodbye to this hell. Eriko, someone's coming. My father and mother died. Oh boy, here we go. Let's take a trip to Takano's tragic backstory. I don't know exactly how old they were. I was too young to remember. They went shopping without me, and that must be why they were punished. It was a train accident. What a terrible disaster. A lot of people died in that incident. But maybe my father was one of the lucky ones. He was still alive when he arrived at the hospital, so he was able to share his final words with me. My mother died instantly.
お父さんお父さんお父さんお父さん
I didn't want to admit that this person I could hardly recognize was my father. As I called out to him, I hoped it was someone else instead. But, unfortunately, it was my father. Maybe I shouldn't have woken him, because when I woke him up, he was reminded of the miserable agony that he had forgotten.
お父さんお父さんお父さんお父さん
He tried to move his right arm so he could pat my head, but his arm was wrapped in bandages, and his hand was no longer there. I couldn't find his hand anywhere on the bed. Always things about patting heads, right? That seems to be something that comes back a lot. I only had scary memories of his right hand. Its main job was to slap me when I did something bad. Oh, and she grew up in a potentially abusive household. Oh, man, Takano. But I never wished it to be gone. Besides, that hand also patted my head, even though that only happened a few times. It was a big warm hand and it stroked my head very gently. But no matter what good deeds I did, he could no longer rub my head. No, his hand was the least of his worries. He had to go into emergency surgery. The doctors already warned me the chance of him surviving were very low. That was why I was allowed to see him regardless of his condition. Not only could he no longer rub my head, he might be gone forever.
お父さん手術できっと良くなるよねお父さんきっと元気になれるよねなれるよね
よく聞きなさい。お父さん、ダメかもしれない。もしも、お父さんが死んでも。
嫌だ嫌だお父さんは元気になるよお医者様がちゃんと手術してくれるもんだから死んだりなんかしないんだよ
He was a stubborn and old-fashioned father. He believed endurance was a virtue and never complained about anything. That was why I couldn't believe he actually said he might not make it. I tried desperately to deny his words. But even that wish wouldn't prolong his life. My father, knowing his time was limited, tried to tell me some important things. But I interrupted his efforts by crying like a baby. I just wanted him to slap me, just like he used to do every time I cried like a baby. But he would never slap me again.
よく聞きなさい。お父さんも、お母さんも。だから、お父さんが死んだら、お前の世話をしてくれる人は、誰もいない。
Wait, so... not her grandfather? He didn't need to tell me that. My parents used to tell me that all the time, so I was aware of that fact. In other words, my father was the only relative I had left in this entire world.
もしもな、お父さんが死んだら、高野先生を頼りなさい。
Oh.
高野、ひふみ先生だよ。
Okay.
言ってみなさい。
And that she took his last name.
高野ひふみ
そうだ。高野、ひふみ先生だよ。高野先生は、きっと、お前を助け。
お父さんお父さんお父さんお父さん
Many doctors came to the room in a hurry. He wanted to tell me something else, but the doctor stopped him from talking, so I wasn't able to hear him. He's like, if he starts telling you about parasites, don't look too much into it. I was kicked out of the room. I didn't know what to do. Nobody told me how my father was doing or when the surgery was going to start. And nobody told me that was going to be the last conversation I ever had with my father. I think I asked people at the government office about Dr. Takano. They'd asked me if I knew his phone number. I said I didn't. Then they didn't ask me anything further. Sometimes they told me they'd look into it, but nothing led to anything. They couldn't find me a guardian, so I ended up going to an orphanage. At the time, there were plenty of orphans from the war, so although there were many orphanages around, they were all full. There was also some orphanages run by civilians. I was sent to one of those civilian orphanages, and let me guess, she got horribly abused at the orphanage because she just can't seem to catch a break. There was no profit to be had in taking in an orphan in the first place, so I thought those civilians who were running orphanages must have been very good people. I was sure they'd hoped that the children would grow in this loving environment and enter into society with a sense of gratitude. But reality isn't so kind. How many children in this world can actually express their gratitude towards their parents in the first place? Children are supposed to be nurtured by their parents' love. Therefore, when that environment is destroyed, their hearts are wounded. Every child has his or her own personality. Receiving affection doesn't guarantee a child will become someone angelic. Not everyone's heart can be healed. That was why there were some problem kids at the orphanage. Maybe I shouldn't call them problem kids, though. The sadness and despair of losing their parents, and the anger at having to hide such feelings filled those kids' hearts. Spending time individually with the children could have solved their problems. But at the orphanage where I was, none of the staff members even tried to spend time with them or put in an effort to understand them. All they could do was make sure the kids followed the rules. Therefore, they could only see the children's emotional pleas for help as problems. In this world, nobody expresses love without expecting something in return. The person who founded that orphanage was expecting something in return as well. He wanted the children to appreciate him. That was why such a faint dream was destroyed by cruel reality. The children called the orphanage a prison, and nobody appreciated the staff at all. In fact, all they did was complain. That made the staff slowly realize that love alone couldn't run a facility like that. Just like how the children call it a prison, the staff started to recognize the facility as a prison too. It was a chain reaction resulting from mistrust on both sides. Staff bound the children with rules so they could suppress problem behavior. There was a framed picture of the founder of this orphanage, but I'd never seen him in person. Was he satisfied with the fact he put his own money into the social service? Or maybe he finally realized his dream of being surrounded by angelic children and being celebrated for what he did was simply that, a dream. It seems like there's the parallel maybe between the person who runs the orphanage also wanted to do something that maybe he could live on in infamy as well, and, after he died, he would be seen as like, oh, he was this good person who ran this orphanage, so his legacy would carry on, I don't know. But there's one thing I'm certain of. Such a dream didn't exist at the orphanage. There were so many rules and several plausible standards outlined for us, but the most valued one was silence. Children's chatter tends to increase each other's volume, just like mics drawing closer. And sometimes that leads to fights and the disturbance of order. So children were forbidden from speaking with each other. With those disallowed, they must have thought things would go smoothly. However, I think I always heard people's voices at the orphanage. There were two kinds of voices. One was the staff yelling, and the other was the children crying. We were not allowed to walk around inside the orphanage freely, so we never knew who it was that was crying. One time, along with the crying and yelling, we heard the noise of metallic things being smashed against each other. We knew it was some kind of punishment, but there was no way for us to even imagine what it was. We trembled, pretended we didn't hear anything, and kept working on our assignments. One of my roommates told me it was the casket punishment, but she didn't tell me any further, and I didn't want to know either. Even if we behaved exactly the same way as yesterday, if the staff were in a bad mood, they might pick on us. So even if I didn't want to know, I might suddenly find out what the casket punishment is one day. The footsteps of a staff member were getting closer. We noticed them, so we straightened our backs and pretended we were studying hard. It was more important that the staff saw us doing so than us actually getting any work done. I noticed the girl next to me was falling asleep, so I poked her with my elbow. She noticed my signal and straightened her back like the other children. It was almost evening. This was the hardest time for us to keep ourselves awake, and the most dangerous time. The door to our room opened and a mean-looking man showed up. Then he looked around to make sure none of us were falling asleep. Even if we were actually studying hard, if he thought we were asleep, we were out. That was why we had to make sure we appeared to be studying very hard. The man walked around our desks. I hoped he would just walk by me. That was what we all prayed for as we kept working on our homework. The more we pretended to study hard, the more we could hear the sound of metal objects. The sound of metal objects crashing into each other along with screams. We couldn't even imagine what the poor subject of that punishment was going through. Maybe there was something even worse than the casket punishment. To erase such fears, we tried to concentrate even harder on our work. We kept working, as the metal sounds and the screams went on forever. The only time we were allowed to exchange words with our roommates was right after turning the lights off to go to bed. Being located in the middle of the mountains, the orphanage was very quiet at night. After making sure the staff members were far enough from our room, we enjoyed talking amongst ourselves. That was the only leisure time allowed to us, though it wasn't anything nice like enjoying pleasant conversation. Why? Because we mostly talked about others behind their backs. We spoke of things like, that member of staff is only strict or unfair or malicious towards this person, and so on. We just repeated those topics forever until someone couldn't keep themselves awake anymore. We even discussed how we could get back at the staff, and then we took revenge on all of them in our imagination. Some kids even started to cry while talking about it, difficult as it was for us. Although the subjects we spoke of were negative, talking about them was the only way to vent our frustration, and even though we felt despair about tomorrow, we were able to fall asleep. But sometimes a different subject popped up. It was about the Gyoko House of Love and Mercy on the other side of the river. Yeah, over there I hear they get not only nap time, but snack time too. Plus, their president is a very nice person. The House of Love and Mercy was a privately run orphanage, just like the one I was at. But it was a very kind facility, unlike ours. It seemed like a fantasy land compared to our current environment. A few years before, when this place was a lot worse, a few children tried to escape. It was hard to believe. There was a time where this orphanage was even worse to live at. Supposedly, 3 or 4 people tried to escape. I don't know the exact number, though. They headed to the House of Love and Mercy. Their escape was a success. Except for one unlucky child, they were able to get to the property of the House of Love and Mercy. I guess the staff couldn't follow them into the other orphanage's property. In other words, the other facility's property had to be out of their jurisdiction. The staff were frustrated the kids got away from them, and they dragged the one they caught back here. I'm sure they wanted to bring back the others who got away from them too. I'm certain the staff were determined not to let a single one escape. It was easy to see the determination in the obstinate way they locked the place up after that event. But they were never able to bring back the ones that got away. No matter how much the staff were mortified, they couldn't reclaim the children and punish them. In other words, if you could make it to the House of Love and Mercy, then you could escape the evil clutches of this hell. Okay, so that's what we caught them doing, was trying to escape. Are we going to do the flash forward here? On the other hand, the one they caught went through such misery afterwards. Oh, what did they talk about? What was it called? The splayed piggy? I don't want to know, because I'm just thinking of someone who's being, like, splayed apart. Yet the exact details of how he was punished were never passed down. All that remained were ominous phrases left by those who knew him at the time. The drowned ducky. The mashed caterpillar. The splayed piggy. I can't even imagine what kind of punishments they were. The only thing I can say is those punishments were supposed to be far more harsh than the casket punishment, which was the most cruel punishment I knew at the time. I can only imagine how horrible those punishments were from their ominous names. Yeah, it's creepy. It's like, it's got like a childlike name to it, but then also horrible, like mashed caterpillar. It's like, what do you think? Just someone being stepped on and squished? The drowned ducky, I mean, that's pretty implied what that is. Maybe, I'm guessing the splayed piggy is someone who's like, got themselves, their arms and legs spread, and maybe they're like beat until they squeal like a piggy or something like that. After that, the captured kid's wish came true, and he was able to leave the orphanage. Was he able to leave the orphanage safely and enjoy his freedom while breathing in fresh air under the blue sky? Well, according to the rumors, that wasn't what happened at all. While he was playing in the boiler room, he slipped and fell, injured his brain, and died. The children were instructed not to go into the boiler room after that incident. Everyone knew the boiler room was always locked. So everyone knew he was killed. And not just that. He was killed after being tortured. He was killed to teach the other children they would face hell on earth if they tried to escape. Yet those who faced that risk and made it out obtained ordinary average lives full of love and mercy's namesake, which were far better conditions than we lived in here. Maybe the House of Love and Mercy was really heaven. Maybe all the orphanages are pretty much the same. But compared to my orphanage, I bet anything else would have been better. Even if someone escaped successfully, the police would catch him. Then he'd be sent back to the orphanage, which would be pretty much the same as being killed. However, if he could reach the House of Love and Mercy, they'd take him in. They wouldn't send him back. By talking about escaping to the House of Love and Mercy, we were trying to forget how cruel reality was to us. And one day, the leader of our group, Eriko, said to us quietly, "Would you try to escape, if you had a chance to?" Who didn't want to escape from here? It was a rather foolish question. But that wasn't what she meant. If there was a chance to escape, would you take that chance knowing what you had to go through if you got caught? That was what she meant. Not one of us could answer immediately. If the previous escape incident was a total success, then we might have thought differently. But after that, the orphanage had tightened up security to prevent runaways. All the doors and windows were locked heavily, and it wouldn't be easy to get out. Even if another group escape was planned, the success rate would be very low. Three escaped and one was caught before. Maybe 2 would be caught next time. No, maybe everybody would be. If I could, I'd want to escape. But the House of Love and Mercy is so far away. The bridge is long, too. We'll all be caught before we get there. Besides, we can't even go outside. Everything is locked up. There were locks all over the orphanage. To escape, you'd need a key for both the inside and the outside, and after the lights were turned off, even each section of the hallway was individually locked. Make no mistake, this was a prison. According to the rumors, orphanages receive government funding depending on the number of children they house. I was thinking that, I'm like, why would they be so concerned? Like, if this guy doesn't really care about children, why would he have an orphanage? It's like people who adopt children, like just adopt a lot of children and basically just take the government funding, but they don't give a shit about the kids. So if anyone escapes, they lose money. Also, if we were to expose the conditions at the orphanage, they would end up being inspected and things would get complicated for them. That was why they were so intent on keeping us locked up. Sure, if there was a chance I would want to escape, but realistically, there's no way we could. Every door is locked. Well, did you know? The hen house in the courtyard uses the same key as the door to the back stairs. Eh? Really? Shh. Eriko shushed us. Sometimes mass-produced locks take the same key. Of course, most places use different types of locks, so this won't happen, but the staff of the orphanage must have overlooked it. So there were 2 locks that used the same key at the orphanage. However, most of us never had a chance to even touch the keys. But there were a few exceptions. One of those was the hen house. Each room group took turns taking care of different chores. If your group was assigned to clean the hen house, you'd have to get the key to it from the teacher's office. You were supposed to return the key immediately after you were done. But while taking care of the hen house, the key was in the children's hands. While the staff would occasionally come around to check, they couldn't keep an eye on us forever. Eriko-chan, you aren't thinking about using that key, are you? Let's not. It's too dangerous. Of course it's dangerous if there's only one of us. But it's different if we're in a group. Basically, it's the whole thing is, it's like outrunning a wild animal. It's like, I don't have to outrun the wild animal, I just have to outrun you. Wait, why? Do you know why only 1 kid was caught the last time they tried to escape? They were desperate. And so to escape as a group, they did something to increase the chance of success. That was why only 1 of them was caught. What did they do? They scattered as they ran. They dashed in different directions. They waited until the day when there were only a few people working at the orphanage and ran this way and that. And so, although it all depended on luck, it would increase the chance of success for sure. On your own, you'd probably have no hope, but if the staff were to chase after other children, then your own chance of escaping successfully would increase. In other words, Eriko was inviting us to escape with her. The more children joined, the more each of our chances would increase. But among us, there were children who tattled to the staff for their own benefit. So she had to be very careful about who she talked to. Eriko must have trusted us a lot. Eriko, me, Tomomi, and Kikuko. 4 children. Do any of you want to stay here a day longer? The 3 of us shook our heads, but at the same time we couldn't agree to escape with her either. Of course we don't want to stay here a day longer, or even an hour longer. Even if we did exactly the same thing as we did yesterday, we might get yelled at tomorrow. I can't stand this anymore. I can't stand living in fear of what to do and what not to do so I won't be yelled at. We all feel the same way. We could endure strict rules, but it was almost impossible to endure vague ones. It wasn't too much of a stretch to say the rules depended on the mood of the staff. This is okay, that isn't okay. Such borderline rules change daily, and if we were to say anything about that, we would be treated horribly for it. I will escape, even if I have to do it alone. Like I said, the more people that join, the better our chance. Think about it. If they find out about this henhouse key trick, they're sure to change the lock on the back door. In other words, we only have one chance. So even if you regret not joining in later, it'll be too late. But, oh, I'm scared. I'm scared too. If we get caught, we'll be killed. Tomomi and Kikuko weren't the only ones who felt afraid. Fear was perfectly understandable, because all of a sudden the fear of the punishment that would follow had become very realistic. I'm sure Eriko felt the same way too, but her courage was suppressing her fear, and because of that she shared her idea with us. So, do you plan to stay here forever? No way. I know you're scared, but this is the only chance we have. You have to be brave just this once. What about you, Miyoko? Don't you want to go with me? Unlike Tomomi and Kikuko, I wasn't trembling that much because she's stone cold like that. Of course, I was scared in my own way, but compared to the other 2, I must have appeared rather calm. Can we really escape? Of course, Eriko couldn't guarantee our success, but I had to ask her anyway. There's no guarantee, but if you join me, I'll have a better chance of escaping than trying to run on my own. Of course, the same goes for you too. Eriko gave a calculated reason, but I'm sure she just wanted a friend to agree with her. That was probably more important to her than increasing her chances to escape. Tomomi, Kikuko, if you're too scared, then I won't force you. Miyoko and I will escape ourselves. 2 is enough. Oh, well... Eriko rushed the 2 to make up their minds. It almost looked cold, but it was her way of mustering their courage. Because it was very possible that regardless of the outcome of our escape attempt, as our roommates, those 2 would be held responsible. It's not like we'll do it tomorrow. Our turn to take care of the henhouse is in a week. We'll wait for the perfect time to do it. If we don't feel it's safe, then we'll wait until our next turn. We'll be very careful. The rotation of the staff and the timing was important, but we also each had to know the way to the House of Love and Mercy. We were planning to split up, so we had to know the area. I made up my mind. Okay, I'm coming with you. But let's time our escape very carefully, okay? Of course. We'll be killed if we get caught. I don't want to die. I'll come too. Me too. Tomomi and Kikuko agreed, and so we all decided to escape as a group. We waited for the perfect opportunity. Well, we know Takano made it. Either she made it or she got caught but not killed, but maybe tortured. But I'm wondering if maybe she feels a little bit of guilt. Maybe she made it, but the other ones didn't. We waited for the day where only a few staff members were at the orphanage, and we decided to let God take care of the rest. Alright, here we go. Oh, it's open! Maybe it was the way I did it. Eriko tried to open the lock several times without success, but I got it open on the first attempt. The back door opened slowly, and we felt a cool breeze. This wasn't the world of freedom just yet. In fact, it was the exact opposite. If the staff were to find out we were here, we would be in big trouble. It was a world of danger. But unless we went through that dangerous world, we wouldn't be able to go any further.
Yoshi. Ikuyo.
And I was starting to be a little concerned that the voice acting would never come back. I think Eriko wanted to say that. We were planning to leave with that as our cue. But what we heard instead wasn't Eriko's voice. Oh, uh-oh. We started to run. It was raining. We all got soaked immediately and our clothes stuck to our skin. While that would normally be very uncomfortable, we couldn't even stop to think about that. Oh, all because Eriko couldn't open a dang lock, although, given the situation, I would probably be the one fumbling and I would have to take someone else to do it, because I get, when I get nervous or anxious, it's like I can't function. We could only keep running in the rain. We were dashing on gravel, but it felt more like trudging through a muddy rice field. My feet kept sinking and I couldn't pull them up. I was frustrated because no matter how fast I tried to run, I wasn't gaining any speed. I felt a sense of urgency. I heard someone yelling "escape" behind me, and all I could do was run like crazy. With Eriko's cue, we all went different ways, hoping they wouldn't be coming after us. Would we be able to reunite safely at the House of Love and Mercy? All four of us there together? Or maybe someone would be missing. No, maybe everyone else would make it, and I'd be the one who gets caught. My thoughts were interrupted by the voice of a staff member coming from behind me. The staff member should have numbered fewer than us, so if I was lucky, they wouldn't be coming after me. Praying that the staff voices I heard in the distance weren't after me, I looked back for a moment. If I had time to turn around, why didn't I take another step forward? Why didn't I try to escape further? Uh-oh. As I turned around, I felt a huge hand cover my face. Its pinky finger slipped into my open mouth. What's going on here? The hand grabbing my face shoved me into the muddy gravel. Of course I didn't stay quiet. I fought back, and then I saw his face. It was the scariest face I'd ever seen. I realized it immediately. He only wanted to capture me alive to use me as an example. And considering what would happen to me afterwards, killing me here on the spot wouldn't pose any problem, would it? Yes, he looked at me with an unworldly hate, ready to end my life here and now. His pinky finger ended up touching my tongue. Bite him! Bite him! Bite him! The indescribably nasty taste sent an icky feeling through my whole body. Oh, that's it. This is what my murder tastes like. He was going to shove that finger down my windpipe and suffocate me. And so in order to live, I fought back in the only way I could. Bite him! Something warm filled my mouth. It felt like swallowing blood after a nosebleed. I spit it from my mouth and ran without turning around, leaving behind the staff member clutching his pinky finger. I heard his roars echoing behind me. It wasn't a man that was after me. It was a beast. He had no interest in capturing me. His only goal was to see me dead. My shoes had slipped off. They weren't sneakers, so they came off easily while I was running like mad. My bare feet struck the gravel over and over. It was painful, but I didn't care, because if I stopped, I knew what would happen to me. Tree branches cut my face and barbed wire scratched my thighs. My feet and toes were bloody from running on gravel. The blood from the staff member's pinky finger dripped down my mouth, staining my chin and chest. I was running for my life with scratches and cuts all over my body. If I were to get caught, I would be killed. If my pursuer had any sense, then I would be killed after being tortured. But if he didn't, I'd be killed on the spot. I don't want to be killed. I don't want to be killed. My lungs and heart were about to explode. My mind was blank from fear and lack of oxygen. I was about to lose consciousness. This is kind of like bringing me back to when Shion escaped from her school, except with her there was never really any danger. Like, she got through it relatively fine. This is like the worst case scenario. I might have given in if I didn't hear the voice of the staff member coming after me. My knees were shaking. My legs wouldn't move properly. I felt like I was going to fall like a puppet with its strings cut. But I couldn't fall. I couldn't fall just yet. Oh, it was too late. My face had hit the gravel. What's gonna happen? I felt the awful sensation of falling, and immediately after, the roar of the beast coming from behind me. Oh, shit. Oh. Oh, she had a dream. Oh, we better see what... I want to see what happened afterwards. You can't leave it at that. I must have hit my thigh against the steering wheel when I jumped. I can feel the throbbing pain delayed slightly. I'm sweating all over. I wiped the sweat on my forehead and put my hand on my chest, only then realizing how fast my heart was beating. I rubbed my thigh. I rubbed it in a straight line. That's not where I hit the steering wheel, but I feel like this is where it hurts. I can't see a scary beast in the moonlit car. I have my shoes on and I'm not covered in blood. Man, she's like so stone cold and she was just hiding this all, right? It's just like she just always seems so calm. Once again, it's interesting that we're getting her perspective on things and how she became who she was. I'm still not going to have sympathy for her for the end, and I'm still hoping that the gang is going to be able to stop her. My toes are fine too. Someone knocked on the window, startling me.
サンサ、時間です。
ありがとう。
I wanted to take a nap, so I told him to come wake me up in an hour. Maybe an hour was too long. Too long a nap actually makes you tired. I put my seat back up and got out of the car. The cool breeze feels good on my skin. I only see the moon. There's nothing else to see on this mountain trail. My car and a command vehicle disguised as a trailer are parked on the side of the street. I can still feel that bad taste in my mouth. I spat it out on the side of the street. But even that couldn't get rid of it. A taste of blood, saliva, and rain. Sweat from my forehead and raindrops got into my mouth, but I couldn't swallow, so I ended up drooling. That sensation around my lips brought back memories, and I tried to wipe my mouth. Maybe I'm nervous. That's why I had such a bad dream. I think there's a coffee machine in the command vehicle. An unpleasant cup of coffee will wake me up.
どう？
It's weird having this, like, nice music when we know it's Takano and the Mountain Dogs.
いえ、何も。先ほどジーチクから定期連絡が。問題なしとのことです。
そう。ねえ、どなたかコーヒーを入れてくださらない？
はい。ミルクと砂糖は？
ミルクだけ。あ、やっぱり砂糖も入れてくださる？
I still have a bad taste in my mouth. The feeling of biting and crushing his little finger and his filthy blood filling my mouth. I'm sure a sweeter cup of coffee will wash down that bad taste and also wake me up from my nightmare completely. Alright, okay, so I definitely want to know more. I want to, like, did she make it to the other orphanage? What happened afterwards?
はい、バンケットより後方。スピーチあと一人で乾杯に入ります。準備できてるね。
後方 OK です。内部全然聞こえないんで、スピーチが終わるタイミングでコールをお願いします。
いいかい。各宅にビールは10本ずつだよ。ちゃんと自分の縄張りにスムーズに運んでね。
Young hotel workers dressed smartly in bow ties pulled bottle after bottle out of the beer cases, preparing for the toast. They waited for their cue to serve the drinks while listening through the intercom. At a normal party, they could put bottles of beer on the table ahead of time, but there was a lecture before the party, then they couldn't. Guests don't mind sushi going dry due to a long speech, but they don't like seeing their tables get wet with condensation from the bottles of beer. And more than anything, they certainly don't want to drink warm beer. That's why beer had to be served right before a toast. However, there's always a speech before a toast, and usually a long one. Especially at a big party like this, there are lots of guests that give speeches, so it's extremely difficult to know when to serve. For that reason, the bottles ended up sitting outside by the banquet room, and people ended up drinking warm beer anyway. There were several dozen tables with white tablecloths on them in the banquet room. Approximately 8 people were sitting at each table, so there was at least a few hundred people in the room. The banquet room was filled with excitement. There were many plates with many different kinds of food on each table. A sushi platter, a sashimi platter, a fruit platter. Also alongside the wall there were cooks ready to serve fresh sashimi. All the guests appeared to be well-mannered gentlemen and were clearly notable people in various different fields. The huge and beautiful chandelier above them clearly indicated this hotel held a status good enough for these famous people. An elderly gentleman was giving a lengthy speech on the stage before making a toast. Usually people don't like such long speeches, especially if it's before a toast. But the guests occasionally shouted, "Yes, yes," and sometimes gave him loud applause, filling the room with their fervor. Well, maybe fervor was a pleasant way to put it. It was probably more accurate to say that their excitement was bizarre. Ooh, which country would actually teach people not to show respect towards their own flag? There are no others. It's happening only in Japan. That's right, that's right.
これからはお国のためよりも個人の才能を伸ばす時代。バカ言っちゃいけない。いいですか。彼らが今勉学に励み、 夢や進路を自由に選択できるのは
Oh.
先人たちが切り開いた土壌があってこその権利。
Is this the beginning of the Tokyo group? To know ourselves, to know our culture, to understand our history and our country itself. Those are the things that make you realize you are a Japanese citizen, that makes you understand the part you play as a citizen of this country. And the feeling you get from that is love towards your own country. However, those anti-Japan teachers are proclaiming that it's militaristic brainwashing. Those stupid claims are wrong. What are those people doing anyway? They're teaching our children to hate being Japanese. They're the ones brainwashing them with this self-destructive education. They're teaching our children that Japan should be ashamed of itself, and that they should be ashamed of being Japanese. Forget who you are and deny your country. That's what they're teaching them. These innocent children listen and believe such nonsense. Of course they do. They go to school to learn things, right? If their teachers teach them that, of course the children believe it. Can you believe such corruption exists? We must do something about this country's education now, no matter what it takes. The sound of applause filled the banquet room. All the gentlemen agreed and expressed that they felt the same way by cheering him on. After that, a gentleman wearing a cloth sash approached the stage. The hall welcomed him onto the stage with another round of thunderous applause. A rousing theme from a popular drama series played as he took the stage, but it was entirely unnecessary before the overwhelming applause. The man's sash carried his name written in large letters, along with the name of the prefecture he was running for office in. Let me introduce to you a patriot, XX-kun. This man has served the former governor as his right-hand man as director of the office of the governor for many years, supporting the prefecture's government for a long time. Since the previous governor has decided to retire, he was appointed as the next governor. Unfortunately, we have those anti-Japan teachers in our prefecture. While they proclaim freedom of education and freedom of thought, they're shamelessly forcing an anti-Japan education down on our children. They don't teach real history. They teach our children that everything was Japan's fault. They don't even mention the true purpose of the Greater East Asia prosperity sphere, or all those who fought to save Asian people from Western control. They don't even talk about how many Asian countries were actually Western colonies before Japan stood up for our freedom during the war. Our country has recovered amazingly since then, yet our children don't know any of that because their teachers don't teach them. How truly, truly sad. I can't stand the fact those anti-Japan teachers are actually teaching our children alongside those teachers who take teaching seriously. They are insulting our educational institutions. I will become a governor and get rid of those teachers. I will straighten out our education system and make sure our children will grow up to be decent young people who carry on Japan's future. He XX-kun announces his candidacy for the next year's prefectural governor. He, XX-kun, announces his candidacy for the next year's prefectural governorship. We appreciate your support for him. I promise I will straighten out Japan's education system. Thank you for your support. Again, the banquet room filled with applause. The man was receiving a standing ovation. I need to explain a bit about this banquet before you misunderstand. It wasn't the conference of a political association or a lecture by a political candidate. It was hard to believe, but this was nothing more than the meeting of a college's alumni association. Everyone should be familiar with what those are. Whether it's elementary school, junior high school, or college, once you graduate from one of those, you normally belong to an organization of alumni. You receive invitations for reunions where you enjoy talking about the good old days. However, there are many different types of such organizations. Some are simple, and some are united with much tighter bonds. And once an organization becomes united with those tight bonds, it is no longer a simple organization of alumni. Rather, it becomes a significant faction known as an alma mater clique. I think I pronounced that wrong. In Japanese society, it's traditional for graduates to form tighter bonds that go beyond the level of an organization. Also, the more superior the alma mater... I think it's alma mater? Oh boy. I'll just say alma mater. The stronger that tendency holds true. The Imperial University, one of the best universities in the country, is famous for the deep bonds its graduates form. Why do superior people like to bond? It may be because they take pride in being superior. But more than that, maintaining connections is the most significant reason. All Imperial University graduates are elites in their respective fields. They are likely to succeed and become important people. When they do, the unity of the Alumni Association gains immeasurable meaning. In fact, even today, the Imperial University graduates maintain their tight academic clique, and they hold great influence throughout the many different fields. They interact with other universities as well, so the graduates' bonds are extremely tight, even today. Additionally, while Imperial University usually refers to the University of Tokyo, sometimes it's used to mean all 7 major universities in Japan. They are located in Tokyo, Kyoto, Tohoku, Kyushu, Hokkaido, Osaka, and Nagoya. They are all great schools. There happens to be an organization of alumni that includes all of these seven universities. My goodness, there's so much talking in this first part. Woo! The elderly gentlemen in this banquet room were from each of those organizations. However, not every graduate would get an invitation here automatically. It is a society of select gentlemen, and in order to become a member, one must first fulfill several conditions, such as recommendation from an existing member, contribution to society, possession of status, and so forth. Therefore, all the members are important people from different fields, and obviously the power of this organization is of a political nature. But there's one more very important criterion one has to join. Strong patriotism, a heart that longs to contribute to Japan and its rebirth. As a result, this organization has become extremely nationalistic. Up on that stage, the candidate for the prefectural governorship was still talking passionately. And among those elderly gentlemen in the crowd, Takano can be found. Takano seemed used to this kind of conference and seemed unsurprised at anything that was said. But at the same time, she looked rather fed up with it. As she was in attendance, she must have been one of their members, which meant she possessed not only an extremely excellent academic background, but that the older gentleman here had acknowledged her equivalent contributions to society, and that she possessed strong patriotism. However, her academic background was the only qualification she had met to join. She was only able to join as a special case because of her connections. She didn't even hold prejudiced ideas like the other members did. So why was she here today? Probably because of the same reason as the man giving a speech up on stage. The man on the stage didn't actually have prejudiced ideas, much like Takano. He only prepared a speech that he knew the guests would like. Politicians only want votes. Each and every person has a vote, but appealing to each one of them takes too long. So the most efficient way to appeal to organizations with a unified idea and a unified will. In other words, this man was giving this speech so he can garner support from those powerful people. The elderly gentlemen in the banquet room will then do their best to support him since he appears to share their ideals. They can offer many different types of expendency, support, and assistance. To an outrageous degree, I might add. If the day's event continued the same way, the organization would likely decide to officially support him. They will probably give him a great deal of financial aid. They'll assist him in different ways as well. Of course, the man on the stage won't be the only one gaining something. When he wins the election and becomes a governor next year, the organization will welcome the governor as a new member and gain even more political influence. And eventually, the organization will become so powerful that nobody can ignore it. Those of you reading this right now probably get the sense that they're no mere alumni association. You'd be absolutely right. After reaching this level, they were a fine syndicate. No, they would be a secret society if the group wasn't so open about its activities. Now, I'm sure some of you readers are brushing this off, thinking there's no way such a suspicious organization could exist in Japan. But everything I've explained is entirely true. There are several such influential groups and organizations within our society, and you need to understand that they hold powerful political clout and influence on our national policies. Some are alma mater cliques like the one I've described above. Others are scientific societies serving different parties, industrial groups, adversary committees, religious organizations, community service groups, and so forth. Also, there are right wings and left wings, the hawk and the dove. I won't go listing their specific names here, yet you've probably read them every now and then in your average newspaper. In Japan, the terms for such forces aren't very common. Most of you readers probably think of a suspicious organization wearing white hoods when you hear the phrase secret society and laugh it off. But unfortunately, that's a huge mistake. In America, where there's far more territory and citizens, there's way more groups like that, and they possess such vast influence that ignoring them is impossible. I mean, if anything that the past couple of years have taught me about politics and things is, like, nothing's really too far out of the realm of, like, a group of small people influencing way more than you'd expect, but I'm not going to get into that stuff. So the terms they use for such forces don't apply to those on the scale of the syndicate. Sometimes people say such groups have more power than the White House, and they are referred to as the shadow government. Even here in Japan, we had a shadow government before the war, our Zaibatsu. After we lost the war, the GHQ dismantled those blocks, but 40 years have passed since then. There's no guarantee our country hasn't given birth to another shadow government, given how good we are at collusion, groundwork, and backroom deals. Mio Takano was in fact attending a conference of such a shadow government. Man, what am I, like a hour and a half in and I haven't seen a single sprite yet. It might appear to be a guest house at a huge golf course. There were no golfers in sight, but by appearances that must be it. But appearances can be deceiving. This wasn't a golf course, but a huge backyard. The guest house was in fact a very stylish mansion. Normal people would be surprised to learn this was a private residence. The interior of the building was as lavish as the exterior. There were beautiful carpets on every floor, expensive-looking decorations on the wall, and expensive-looking bottles of alcohol on the shelves. That's the kind of room Takano was in. There was a knock at the door, and an old man in a wheelchair and a young woman pushing it entered. As Takano stood up to bow, the old man stopped her by raising his right hand. Yeah, it's interesting, like, how a girl who basically lost everything at a young age and, was in an orphanage managed to rise to such power, you know?
畳んでも久しぶりだの。いつでも遊びに来なさいと言っとるのに。
そのお言葉だけで光栄ですわ、小泉先生。
The old man sat down on the sofa with assistance from the woman. He was very old, his face was covered in wrinkles, and he could hardly do anything on his own. Even so, he still held a great deal of power and influence.
相変わらずお盛んですわね。首筋、口紅がついておりますわよ。
ほ、それ本当かね。やれやれ、これはお恥ずかしいの。
There was no lipstick on his neck. The woman who was helping him with his wheelchair was too beautiful to be a mere helper, so Takano had suspected something. As it turned out, her guess was correct. Although he was so old he could die the next day, he wanted to stay sexually active until the very end. Even the Grim Reaper would think that's just absurd.
ミオちゃんもいつの間にかすっかり美人さんに成長したの。いつまでも小さいと思っとったらいつの間にの。
ご冗談を。本当にそう思われていたら、私のお尻を撫でようなんてなさいませんわ。
おい先短い年寄りに触らせても減るもんではないに。
私よりももっと柔らかいお尻を散々撫でておいでのくせに。
Takano and the old man enjoyed a tasteless conversation. They had clearly known each other a long time and were very close. The young woman came back in to serve tea. After she left, the old man started to speak.
しかし、ミオちゃんは本当に立派な子だの。高野くんもこれほど立派に育ってくれて。
そうであればいいのですが、祖父の偉業には私など足元にも及びません。
高野くんもいろいろと運がなかった。時代にも恵まれんかった。もし何もない時代に研究をしておったなら、あんたに引き継がせることもなく見事研究を完成させておっただろうの。
ですが、そういう時代だったからこそ、皮肉にも祖父はひなみざわ症候群の存在に気づくことができました。
The world today is the nuclear era. With America and the Soviet Union glaring at each other over mounds of nuclear stockpiles, it takes nukes to have authority as a major power. Yet we forever abandon our nukes thanks to our 3 anti-nuclear principles. In this age, we are now a nation without nukes. How deplorable. In the middle of the 20th century, despite rising tensions between East and West, there was a temporary peace known as the Cold War brought by a balance of nuclear weapons pointed at one another. Permanent memberships in the United Nations were monopolized by nations with nuclear arms. They secured their predominance with nuclear weapons, bound the world with nuclear non-proliferation treaties, eternally banning non-nuclear nations from the world stage. For Japan to become a nation that could compete with the world, it must develop nuclear arms, or something as powerful. That's what some people believed, at least. Realistically, Japan will never arm itself with nuclear weapons. I know. The citizens wouldn't accept it. Even if the government ignored their opinions and armed itself with nuclear weapons, it wouldn't work. By abandoning nuclear weaponry, Japan gained the deterrent power of the United States. Now, some people thought the only way for Japan to become equal to the United States would be to get nuclear arms of their own. But realistically, that was impossible. Even if Japan armed itself with nuclear weapons, that wouldn't automatically let Japan join the great powers. Takano and the old man discussed the balance of nuclear power in the world. Eventually, the sound of the cuckoo clock reminded them to return to the main subject at hand. The old man pointed to the attaché case that had been sitting next to Takano. Takano nodded once, opened it up, and removed the contents. There were brand new bills packed in it. How much was actually in there? A bundle of brand new million-yen bills is 1 centimeter, so there must have been at least enough to make up 8 digits. There was also 2 more attaché cases by her side. However, neither Takano nor the old man were surprised at all. Takano closed the attaché case and bowed.
ありがとうございます、先生。このご恩は忘れません。
金は人生の長い若者が持つべきだの。年寄りがあの世まで持っていくもんじゃない。金はあるだけものを言うが、大事に使いなさい。
もちろんですわ。祖父の夢を実現するためだけに使います。
高野くんが羨ましいの。良いお孫さんを持たれた。きっとあの世であんたを自慢しているだろうの。
まだ自慢されるようなことは何もしていません。祖父の研究を完成させた時初めて、私は祖父に褒めてもらえる資格が得られるのだと思います。
本当に羨ましい。うちのせがれたちは全然ダメだ。金儲けのことしか頭にない。金は儲けてからが大切なんだ。その儲けた金でお国のために何を貢献できるかが大切なんだ。それこそが今日まで自分を育んでくれたお国へのご恩返しっちゅうもんなんだがの。
あら、たくさんの恋人たちに気前よくおごるのもお国へのご恩返しなんですの？
もちろんだとも。あいつらが買い物をすれば金は巡ってお国に戻る。金は天下の回り物だ。
However, those lovers would probably end up buying some foreign goods. Things probably don't work quite the way this old man thinks they do. Takano chuckled to herself.
だが女どもにばらまく金とミオちゃんに託す金は意味が全く違う。
存じております。
ミオちゃんは今日までよく頑張ってきた。礼を尽くし大勢の人たちの信用と支持を取り付けた。今だから話すが、春山くんも望月くんも最初は君のことを若すぎると批判的だったんだがね。だから私もミオちゃんのその努力を認めてその金を託すんだ。
はい。
そしてな、その金を私が託す。私がミオちゃんを高野くんの研究の正式な後継者だと認めたということなんだ。
ありがとうございます。私ごとき若輩に委ねてくださったことに深く感謝いたします。
いやいや、これは高野くんと君の研究だ。彼もミオちゃん以外が引き継ぐことを望まなかっただろうの。だからミオちゃんがここまで上り詰めたおかげで他の年寄りたちをより説得しやすかったわけだ。
祖父の完成できなかった研究を私が完成させることだけが私ができる、そのために求められる努力ならばいといません。
Takano smiled as she remembered everything she had to go through to get to this point. It went without saying, but the old men around Takano saw her as someone from their grandchildren's generation, or maybe even younger. Just how much trouble did Takano have to endure in order to gain the trust of those with such a large generation gap? It was hard to describe to those who couldn't even imagine her trouble. But Takano earned it. She gathered allies, drove away enemies, garnered support, and forced them to recognize her. She spent a long time establishing trust and rising to a status that the old men would welcome, which was all the more reason this meeting was a reward for her many days of hardship. Now that she officially had a powerful influence backing her, she could spread her wings and see the completion of her grandfather's unfinished research.
さて、高野くんの研究を正式に引き継ぐことになったなら、ミオちゃんにも話しておかなきゃならんことがある。
何でしょう？伺います。
The old man paused and pulled an expensive cigarette from the cigarette holder on the table. Takano lit it up for him. She didn't smoke herself, but knowing that the old man did, she kept a lighter in her pocket. The constant build-up of little gestures like this were how she gained the trust she held today. Takano could notice the Hinimizawa syndrome in Matsuribayashi, not Japan. Yes, according to my grandfather's journal, around 1940, he learned that many soldiers sent from Hinimizawa the Kwantung army expressed terminal symptoms, which led him to surmise that an unknown infectious parasite dwelled in Hinimizawa. Under the harsh conditions of war, people sometimes lost their mind. In those conditions, those who were sent to a far-off battlefield from Hinimizawa spent their days under duress, and occasionally they exhibited terminal symptoms, hallucinated, and caused twisted incidents. Yet that all occurred in the extensive chaos of the battlefield. Every incident was handled separately, and no one suspected there was an underlying cause.
当時高野君は軍医少佐として海外に派兵されていて、現地の貿易研究所で各種伝染病の予防対策について研究していた。そんな中で偶然いくつかの錯乱事件が全て同じ出身地の兵士によって起こされていることを知った。高野君はひなみ沢出身者に特有の症状ではないかと仮定し、個人的にこの研究を始めたのだ。そしてひなみ沢出身の兵士を研究所勤務にして集め、いろいろと調査した。そしてひなみ沢独特のお社様信仰の存在を知り、得意な性質を持つ未知の疾病の存在を確信したのだ。
Some may wonder how he could be so certain that these symptoms were caused by unusual parasites. At the beginning of the 20th century, German doctors proved that some unknown diseases were caused by bacteria and parasites. At the time, it wasn't too far of a jump to assume that unknown pathogens could be behind unknown diseases. For instance, in modern times, it's been revealed that beriberi is caused by vitamin B1 deficiency. But at the start of the 20th century, many loudly proclaimed it was the work of an unidentified pathogen.
はい。祖父はその研究が軍にとって価値のあるものになるのではないかと予想し、予算を求めましたが、一生に付されたとか。
As a researcher, her grandfather was very talented and passionate, but when it came to gaining the aid of political powers, he simply struck out. Hinimizawa syndrome. No, the possible existence of a parasite that infected the human brain and controlled emotions. Even though he made the remarkable achievement of discovering a mystery no one had explained before him, he was unable to convince others of that achievement and spent his life alone, unable to garner support and unable to achieve proper recognition for his achievements. Independent research has its limit. Talented people, funding, and backup. A research project can be successful only if all those things are present. Takano had noticed her grandfather's mistakes, and that was why she did everything she could to obtain all of that.
当時の上層部は即効性でしかも普遍性の高い治療薬を期待していた。高野君の研究は非常に興味深いものではあっても、当時の軍には期待されなかったということだの。
ですが、先生は唯一祖父の研究に理解を示してくれたと聞いています。祖父は先生のことを無二の親友と記していました。
高野君とは同郷だった。同じ蕎麦屋を知る人間と遠方の戦地で会えるというのは奇跡的なことだったの。彼とは年は離れていたが、私たちは固い友情で結ばれていたのだ。だから高野君からはよく話をされたの。画期的な研究になるに違いない。本格的な研究のために予算をつけられるよう根回ししてほしいと何度も相談を受けた。
祖父の手記にも先生がいろいろと各方面に掛け合ってくださったことが記されています。結局祖父の研究が認められることはありませんでしたが、先生だけが理解者でいてくれたことはきっと存命中大きな心の支えになっていたものと思います。
だが結局は何の力にもなれんかった。だから高野君にしてやれなかった協力を美桜ちゃんにするんだ。美桜ちゃんに協力するのは高野君に対する私の罪滅ぼしでもある。
ありがとうございます。祖父は良い親友に恵まれたと思っています。軍上層部に先生のように理解を示してくれる方が少しでもいてくれたなら、祖父の人生はもっと違ったものになっていたかもしれないと思うと、とても悔しく思います。
The old man closed his eyes and paused for a moment. Shortly after that, he looked into the distance and spoke.
実はな、真実はそうではない。上層部は高野君の発見に少なからず関心を持っていたのだ。
え？それは初耳です。でもそれならなぜ祖父の研究を認めなかったのですか？
ある事情により 高野君にひなみ沢症候群を研究させたくない都合ができたのだ。その理由は私と一部の高級将校しか知らん。私を除き全員が他界した今、
okay.
高野君の後を継ぐみおちゃんには話しておこうと思う。
I'm gonna get some new information here.
研究させたくない都合とは何ですか？
Takano had believed until this day that her grandfather's research was ridiculed by everyone, which is the reason why it never gained any recognition. Her grandfather had asked the military for funding so he could uncover the secret of Hinimizawa syndrome during the war. But just like the old man had said earlier, the military wanted an instant-acting weapon. That was why they weren't interested in his research. That's what she had believed. But as it turned out, the military had actually shown an interest after all. Before I go on, I need to explain about the Kwantung army in Manchuria at the time. While the Kwantung army was stationed in Manchuria, opinions were divided on whether to advance our forces north or south. At the time, Japan had troops in Manchuria, but opinions were divided on advancing north to deter the Soviet Union or advancing south to expand our territory and secure resources. With the Soviet Union and its predecessor, Russia, being a landlocked, frozen nation, they had long yearned for an ice-free port that wouldn't freeze over in winter. They had made numerous attempts to expand their territory southward, too. Those expansionist policies were said to be a cause of the Russo-Japanese War. In the history books, it said that Japan won the Russo-Japanese War, but it was actually a draw-end in peace signed at the Treaty of Portsmouth. Both sides had simply set aside their spears after mutually exhausting their forces. It wasn't like Russia capitulated and offered a complete surrender. As a result, the perception of the Russian threat continued to smolder. Later, the Russian Empire was overthrown by a revolution, but Japan was unable to shake the threat that the new Soviet Union would advance south. According to the research books, Japan went south. They signed the Soviet-Japanese Neutrality Pact and abandoned the northern advance. As a result, when the Great Patriot War began, the Soviet Union was able to respond to pressure on the German front by pouring in their eastern forces. Though the Germans had managed to lay siege to Moscow, the Soviets launched a massive counteroffensive that reversed the tides of war. See, you read Higurashi, you get, like, history lessons, too. It's like, who says you don't learn things from video games? Even with the Soviet-Japanese Neutrality Pact, the Soviets couldn't tell if Japan would attack them at some point. Because of that threat, the Soviets had to leave some forces in the Far East, and they weren't able to devote enough troops to the German front. For starters, the Soviets had forged the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, too. Yet Germany broke the treaty and attacked the Soviet Union. To make matters worse, Japan and Germany had forged a military alliance. With all those factors in play, the Soviets naturally couldn't trust Japan to uphold their neutrality pact. Ironically, the Soviet Union was the one who broke the pact, but I won't go into that now. Exactly. Hitler signed the tripartite pact because he expected Japan to keep the Soviets' other front in check. But ultimately, Japan abandoned the north. With a superior German offensive, many supported the idea of waiting and watching it play out. They believed that even if we did advance north, it would be after Germany conquered Moscow. However, that plan was exposed to Sorge, and the Soviets transferred their heavy tanks from the Far East border to the German front. That secured Germany's defeat at Moscow, and the Germans began seeing a string of defeats starting with the Battle of Kursk. It was a turning point in history, huh? During the Cold War, the Soviet Union was recognized as a global power, but at least in 1940, the Kwantung Army didn't think it was a particular threat. Japan had earned a victory with the Russo-Japanese War, and they took the new Soviet Union government lightly, assuming it wouldn't be stable after overthrowing the Russian Empire. That underestimation was corrected after the Nomonhan... Oh my gosh, there's a lot of, terms I've never heard before. Nomonhan incident in 1941. After several fierce short-term battles with the Soviet Union's advanced mechanized corps that led to great losses, the Kwantung Army realized they shouldn't fight the Soviets, and that inclined Japan towards the Soviet-Japanese Neutrality Pact. But at the very least, up until the Nomonhan incident, the Kwantung Army was strongly conscious of the Soviets and divided on advancing north or south. Thanks to that, there were also voices advising caution, suggesting we avoid all-out war with China in order to shore up forces against the Soviets. But the Sino-Japanese War broke out after the Marco Polo Bridge incident, right? July 1937. The Japanese and Chinese armies were staring at each other across the Lugoi Bridge in Beijing. It was the middle of the night on July 7th. The Chinese army fired on the Japanese army in training, and they engaged in combat. This triggered the long Sino-Japanese War. Yes, according to historical records, this incident triggered the Sino-Japanese War, but with opinions divided over advancing north or south, the army was equally divided over a full-scale confrontation with China. No, in fact, we even received orders from General Staff Headquarters to resolve the matter quietly before the incident grew much bigger. So those supporting the northern advance wanted to settle the Battle of Lugoi Bridge quietly, insisting that conflict with China was pointless in light of their anti-Soviet strategy. However, those on the mainland supporting the southern advance used this incident as cause to dispatch more troops to China. They enacted hard policies against China, and thus the Marco Polo Bridge incident became the trigger for Japan and China to enter all-out war. After that and their bitter struggles in the Nomonhan incident, Japan greatly revised their Soviet strategy. They signed the Soviet-Japanese Neutrality Pact and secured the route for their southern advance. The Sino-Japanese War got worse and worse. If the Marco Polo Bridge incident hadn't happened, it's possible history would have gone very differently. Maybe we would have ended up in a war with them anyway. However, if the South faction didn't get that chance, the military authorities would have kept restraining the Soviet Union, and the Soviets would have had to divide their forces between East and West. And maybe Germany could have invaded Moscow. Then Japan could have gone to Siberia. The map could have been very different today. Germany wouldn't necessarily have won the war if it had succeeded in taking Moscow. England was keeping its strength out on the other side of Dover Strait after all, and the United States were poised to enter the conflict. Besides, Napoleon once occupied Moscow, but in the end he couldn't beat their winter and had to withdraw. It's one of those ifs, huh? The Axis might have won the war. Yes, it's possible the gunshot from the Marco Polo Bridge incident changed the tide of history. Both sides had different opinions of who fired the shot, right? According to the Japanese side, a Chinese soldier fired a shot at a Japanese soldier who got too close to the Chinese camp. However, the Chinese side claimed the shot was a conspiracy invented by the Japanese military. But the shot was fired. Even though nobody knew who actually pulled the trigger, it sparked the Sino-Japanese War. Yes, that's what the history books say. But Koizumi-sensei, what does that have to do with my grandfather? That's what I'm wondering. I'm like, man, there's a lot of backstory, but I'm like, I want to know about the Hinimizawa syndrome. In the Marco Polo Bridge incident, a shot was fired at a unit that was training in the middle of the night. Everyone was summoned for a roll call. They were missing one soldier. The soldier came back later and it was said he was sent as a messenger and got too close to the Chinese camp. By the way, did you know that soldier was from Hinimizawa? Eh? Really? When Takano-kun was talking about Hinimizawa syndrome, he said that soldiers from Hinimizawa could suddenly fall in a deranged state. And we realized that the soldier from the Marco Polo Bridge incident was in fact from Hinimizawa. And what about the first shot fired? I don't know the truth, but I think it's possible that a soldier within the terminal stage of Hinimizawa syndrome fired that shot. That soldier was killed in the incident. Since there was no record of it, nobody knows exactly how he died. The Japanese side claimed the Chinese army had fired at them and negotiated with that in mind. Just a scant few days after the incident, Japan demanded an apology from the Chinese and as a show of force dispatched 3 divisions of reinforcements. The Chinese side was, of course, opposed to that. The situation escalated at once. If research into Hinimizawa syndrome continued, the higher-ups thought it would negatively influence the Japanese army's claims. So in order to avoid the risk of traversing the political gray zone, they rejected Takano-kun's research.
そのためこの時代になってもなお祖父の研究が顧みられることがなかったと。
そうだ。
The war is over now, but there are still some conflicts there regarding historical recognition.
高野君にその気はなくとも、Hinimizawa症候群の研究が公になれば、社会的な影響が強すぎて、一般大衆に不要の混乱と疑念を与えることにもなりかねない。そう危惧した重鎮たちが、今日に至るまで高野君の研究を黙殺するよう根回しをしておったのは、私も高野君に協力しないよう長く釘を刺されておった。
Takano tried to remain calm, but she couldn't stop herself from grimacing. She had just found out the real reason why her grandfather's research had been ignored. It was because of secret maneuvers by political masterminds. Those masterminds feared it so much. Ironically, that meant they acknowledged the importance of his research. Takano was saddened and frustrated to no end by her grandfather's lonely life.
だがそういう連中は高いし、もう当時を知る者は私しかおらん。もし今、まだ高野くんが生きていたなら、私はそれを誤って全面的な協力を申し出るつもりだった。だが、彼はもういない。だから私はミオちゃんに謝り、高野くんにするはずだった協力を君にしようと思っているのだ。
よろしいのですか？私が雛見沢症候群の研究をすることで蒸し返しになるということはありませんか？
もう当時とは時代が違う。それに雛見沢症候群の研究には単なる風土病では済まされないものが潜んでおる。研究によっては医学の名前がつくあらゆる学会がひっくり返るような大発見になるかもしれん。
当時とはもう風向きが変わったと。
そうだ。不幸にも高野くんは風向きが変わるまで存命することができなかった。だが幸いミオちゃんという後継者に研究を託せた。だから私はこの命ある限り、私は高野くんに協力を約束したのに、さまざまなしがらみから力になれず彼を失望させた。その償いを命ある限りしていこうと思っている。それが高野くんが無二の親友と呼んでくれた私のこの世に残された最後の仕事だと思っとる。
先生、本当にありがとうございます。
いや、いい。私も死ぬ前に洗いざらいを話せてすっきり。とにかく私の目が黒いうちはミオちゃんの研究に一切の不自由はさせん。何かあったらいつでも頼りなさい。助力は惜しまないからの。
Takano couldn't even imagine what kind of bond this old man and her grandfather had between them. But thanks to that bond, Takano was able to gain a powerful supporter. Tears welled up in Takano's eyes as she gave him an emotional look. But in her mind, she was practically dancing at the promise of the old man's full support. The old man and Takano both bowed at the same time to show each other their appreciation. Once that was done, the old man became a little more serious. After that far too lengthy preamble, he finally said what he really wanted to tell her.
そういうことだ。私が言いたいのはつまり、雛見沢症候群には歴史すらも作りかねない魔力が宿っているということだ。それは日本社会すらもねじ曲げかねない。そこのところをよく肝に銘じて慎重に研究をしなさい。
And she's like, how about I just use it to become a god instead? After the proprietor finished serving the food, she bowed and left. The room was very tastefully put together, reminding them of a tea ceremony room. While it was sparsely decorated, quite a bit of money had obviously gone into it. This was a very famous Japanese restaurant where many high-up officials and other important people held secret meetings. Takano was there accompanied by about 5 gentlemen. She was sitting slightly further away from the men. They were clearly in a much more important position than she was. One of the men, wearing an expensive double-breasted suit, told Takano not to be so nervous.
どうぞお楽に、高野さん。今回の件、非常に興味深く読ませていただきました。このような研究が数十年にわたり眠り続けてきたとは。
驚きです。過去に行われていたこの類の研究はほとんどが実らず、スタッフも解散となって何も残っていないと思っておりましたよ。
And nothing was left after the US military confiscated even the fundamental research.
この研究は上層部にもほとんど相手にされなかったと聞いております。
なるほど。故に誰にも知られず、そして誰の追求も受けなかったというわけですな。その意味においてだけは本当に幸運でした。
高野先生の研究を高野さんが引き継ぐとは面白い。これも因縁ですかな。まるであなたの体を借りて個人が研究を完成させようとしているかのようです。
本当にそうかもしれませんわね。私も奇妙な因縁を感じます。
Takano adored Takano Hifumi and called him grandfather, but she hadn't revealed that relationship to others. She realized it wouldn't be beneficial for people to think she was involving personal feelings in her continuing Dr. Takano's research. So publicly, she once had exchanges with Takano Hifumi, and after his death discovered his research documents with his remains and chose to carry it on. At least that's how the story went.
それで先生いかがでしょうか。
うん。いくつかの省庁がね、非常に強い関心を持ったよ。中川君が言うには、防衛庁の技術研究本部が強い関心を示してくれてね、研究のスポンサーを名乗り出てくれた。
おお、それは朗報じゃないですか。おめでとう、高野さん。
ありがとうございます。
なんでも向こうが言うにはね。
There's a research council for the next generation deterrents being led by experts from several different ministries.
この中でアルファベットプロジェクトというのがあるらしい。高野さんはご存知ですかな？
There was no way she would know about something like that. But it was very possible for these nationalists to research something dangerous without citizens knowing about it. Society forms something like a web made of connections between people. People hold hands with other people who share the same ideas and end up knitting a net. Of course, some nets are well known, but there are some secret ones too. So there was no way of guessing just how the men at this meeting were connected. A society involving research into deterrent weapons for the next generation. The Alphabet Project. With those words, it was possible to imagine what that might entail. Deterrent weapons. That usually refers to nuclear technology. Weapons are normally used to destroy enemies. However, the general idea of deterrent weapons is very different. The assumption is that they won't actually be used against anyone. Nuclear weapons are largely used as a threat to prevent enemy invasion. Both the US and Soviets possess large stockpiles of nuclear arms, keeping each other in check. But they will never actually use them. Because if they did, there'd be nuclear war and both countries would be destroyed. So they're like a legendary weapon you never draw. Of course, that last resort only works because both sides have nuclear weapons. If one side lacks them, then they lose all military negotiation power. In other words, nations without nukes are powerless before nuclear-armed states. That can't be true. Japan abandoned nukes and it still functions as a nation today. Or so some people may be thinking, but they're wrong. Japan abandoned nukes but lies under the nuclear umbrella by allying itself with America. That means the nation functions thanks to America's nukes. However, that also means we must resign ourselves to forever being a vassal of America. In order for Japan to escape that and become a powerful nation equal to America, it must possess its own deterrence arms and step out of that nuclear umbrella. That society must have been put together by experts who believe in that ideal. Given that, even the name Alphabet Project makes sense. Nuclear weapons are weapons of mass destruction. However, weapons of mass destruction aren't always nuclear. They also include biological weapons and chemical weapons. Atomic, biological, chemical. The initials of these three words make up ABC. That's why weapons of mass destruction are sometimes called ABC weapons. I won't go into weapons of mass destruction that don't belong to those three categories. ABC, alphabet. Oh, well there we go, I learned something new today. In other words, Alphabet Project must be a code for research into weapons of mass destruction. As it happened, this guess of Takano's was correct. By rights, Japan should possess nuclear arms. We established ourselves as a peace-loving nation after the war, and after our vast international contributions, we've been recognized as a permanent member of the UN. Yet until we possess nuclear arms, we won't be recognized as a proper nation. That is the long-held desire of post-war Japan. Exactly. However, realistically, thanks to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the major nations hold a monopoly on nukes. Worse, our domestic public opinion is growing allergic to nukes, so foreign and domestic pressures make implementing them impossible. Biological and chemical weapons are sometimes known as the poor man's nuke. Small countries that can't own nuclear weapons have already started research into that kind of weaponry. Haha, Takano-san, please don't misunderstand us, okay? The purpose of our research isn't to obtain a biological weapon. Instead, our goal is to prevent such weapons from coming into Japan from other countries. So this is research into self-defense. I want you to understand that. Yes, I'm aware of that. Takano hated this Japanese tendency to make excuses, but she didn't let it show on her face. No matter what they said, they already saw the value in using this research towards biological weaponry. However, in truth, that was just an excuse as well. If they actually wanted to research biological weapons, then it would be much faster to research disease like smallpox and anthrax instead of an unidentified disease like Hinimizawa syndrome. So it wasn't actually correct to say the defense agency was interested in it as a biological weapon. In other words, Takano needed a powerful sponsor who could back her up with funding, personnel, and a facility to conduct her research. So she used her connections and turned to the old men behind the government and economy, reaching out to each of them and getting them to forcibly pull funding out of the defense agency under the excuse of its application toward biological weaponry. That was the truth. Therefore, her project wasn't officially recognized by the defense agency. To be exact, the people who secretly controlled the defense agency were the ones who knew about it. These masterminds diverted funding from the defense agency to the Alphabet Project, and then they pushed for Takano's research to be part of it. Takano gets her funding, and the influencers get to draw public funds through the kickbacks. Considering that, it was doubtful this project was genuinely about researching the next generation of deterrence arms. It was probably just an excuse for the masterminds to funnel money into their own pockets. Well, those complicated matters didn't matter to Takano. It's like they both have their own ulterior motives for this. Whatever those old men and influencers were planning wasn't her business. As long as she could get the funding for her research, that was enough. Either way, Takano had found her sponsor. It was one of the biggest organizations around, too. This had always been her grandfather's dream. Takano was trying to stay calm, but she was about to jump up and down in excitement.
中川君としては今回の件十分に研究が進んだら丸ごと買い取って構わないと言ってくれ。まだまだ未完の研究だが、その将来性については十分に理解できてるようだ。
おっしゃる通りです。この研究はまだ道半ばで、十分な資金と施設、人材が欠かせません。
それでだね。ここからが交渉になるんだが、向こうとしてはこの研究丸ごと抱えてしまいたいのが希望らしいんだ。こう言っちゃ悪いんだが、君一人に任せるには荷が重いと考えてる。
Hearing that put quite a damper on Takano's ecstasy.
私はお金が欲しくて研究しているのではありません。一人の研究者としての知的探求心からです。私に必要なのはスポンサー。先方が求めるのは成果。そういう関係に期待したかったのですが。
Takano realized she was talking rather breathlessly, so she tried to calm herself down. Either way, they'd be backing the research. Considering they're hoping for results that merit the budget, they'd probably feel Takano is still too young to handle it.
分かってます分かってます。高野さんが今日まで積み上げてきた研究を横からかっさらわれたんじゃ、それはあんまりですからね。そこは私もよく分かってます。もちろん向こうにもそれは伝えました。それで出てきた折衷案がこれです。まずアルファベットプロジェクト内の新規事業として高野さんの研究を立ち上げます。理事会の承認を経れば正式に予算をつけることができますからね。高野さんには客員という形でプロジェクトに参加していただき、研究に携わるという形になります。
If she wanted their funding, she'd have to fall under their authority, of course. So far, she had no objections.
ただ研究会は今回の研究に予算をつけるにあたり、いくつかの条件を挙げています。一つは先ほど先生が申し上げたこの度の研究に関する分野で優秀な才能を持つ人物に研究筆頭を委ねることです。
お言葉を返すようですが、私以上にこの研究に詳しい人物が高野先生を除いて存在するとお思いですか？
まあ、そこは高野さん抑えて。お気持ちはごもっともです。
それではその人物に私が研究を売り渡すのと何も変わらないではありませんか。全く話が違います。
落ち着きなさい、高野さん。
Those cunning old men didn't miss sight of the faint leak of anger that crossed Takano's expression. Oh, the worst thing you can do is tell someone to calm down when they're mad. They gave evasive laughs, as if remarking how immature she still was if she let her emotions show over such a little thing. However, they weren't laughing to look down on Takano. On the contrary, they were trying to tell her to wait until the end.
もちろんそこはあなた、小泉先生からあなたをよろしく頼むと念を押されているんです。第4ある小泉先生に託されたあなたを私がないがしろにするとお思いですか？大丈夫です。ここは一つ私に任せてください。あなたも そして連中も納得するうまい妥結点を用意します。
と申しますと？
その人物の人選は私が握っているということですよ。
Everyone chortled except Takano. After a moment, she joined in. In other words, he meant he would find just the right person. The defense agency had suggested finding an expert to lead the project because they didn't feel comfortable with just Takano. However, Takano's sponsor was the one tasked to find such a person. In that moment, Takano realized it. Oh, how wonderful it is to have such a powerful backer.
万事私にあなたがやりやすい候補者をこちらで探します。高野さんはその中から組みやすいと思う相手を選べばいいということです。
Takano felt better after hearing that. While she wouldn't be the official head of the project, she would end up leading it from the shadows. Of course, she wasn't an expert per se. Having a partner would actually be beneficial.
この件、しばらく先方と私の方で調整します。もちろん、高野さんの満足のいく形で決着できるようにしますので、しばらく朗報を待ってください。
はい、お世話になりますが、どうかよろしくお願いいたします。
そうだそうだ、防衛庁の話だけじゃないよ。厚生省の永田君も一枚噛んでくれるそうだよ。国立感染症予防研究所の伊藤君を紹介してくれてね。機材や技術についてのバックアップを名乗り出てくれてる。
本当ですか？ありがとうございます。
もうこれは立派な国家プロジェクトですな。おめでとう高野さん。これも今日までのあなたと、そして高野先生の地道な研究が評価された結果です。
いいえ、すべて高野先生の努力の成果です。私などまだ何も。
謙虚なのは実にいいことです。小泉先生もおっしゃっておられましたが、本当に高野さんはいい方です。
Well, I mean, she has her moments.
可愛がられているというのもうなずけます。
それでですね、向こうとしては高野さんの身分を幸い高野さんは医師免許をお持ちですからね。研究本部の遺憾として身分を保証するようです。
公務員になれということですか？これは意外な話ですね。
アルファベットプロジェクトに携わる研究機関のほとんどは公的機関です。今回の研究は陸自も強い関心を寄せており、職員を陸自から派遣したいと強く要望してきています。ですので場合によっては身分は陸自の扱いになるかもしれません。
まあこの辺は役人の縄張り争いだと思ってください。その役人たちの上に立つには役人の身分が必要になってくると。もちろんどういう形になろうとも高野さんが不快に思うようなことにはしませんから安心してください。
わかりました。そのあたりはお任せいたします。しかし高野先生がかつて軍にこの研究の援助を求めた時には断られたことを思うと、防衛庁が興味を示されたのが意外というか遅いというか複雑な気持ちですね。
それは仕方ありますまいな。
With the war situation worsening, the Japanese military sought something with immediate effect, something that could turn the war around.
決して高野先生の研究を見下していたわけではないはずです。
That wasn't true, of course. Takano already heard that confession from the old man. She exhaled. To her, it was like the meeting in front of her was happening somewhere far away. She had longed for this day to come and worked so hard to reach it. Finally, her grandfather and his research were attaining recognition. This was the day she had dreamed of. So she was frightened just imagining it might be an actual dream. True joy can't be felt all at once. Oftentimes, it's a delayed reaction. Takano thought that must be exactly how she was feeling.
すると思います。多分左官クラスの階級が与えられるのではないでしょうか。となると高野さんは副隊長の地位になりますから、おそらく3佐ではないかと。
これは素晴らしい。高野3佐で、いや羨ましいですな。男に生まれたからには一度ぐらいは自分のことを階級で呼ばれてみたいものですが、いや高野3佐ですか。
I was gonna say, he sounds a little drunk there.
何ですか？
ああ、自衛隊の階級のことで3等陸佐のことです。 企業でいうところの副部長くらいでしょうね。おそらくその階級がプロジェクト発足時に高野さんに与えられることになるかと思います。
昔でいうところの少佐ですよ。そういえば奇遇ですな。高野先生もかつては少佐の階級にあられたそうではありませんか。
Takano remembered suddenly. They were right. Her grandfather had been a lieutenant commander in the Japanese military. Everything she had done until today was so she could continue her grandfather's research. Now everything had fallen into place. She had even been granted the same rank as her grandfather. She had always believed that succeeding his research would be proof that they had a bond tighter than blood. And now she would be even the same rank as him. This is fate, Takano thought. Maybe this is even a message from Grandpa? Yes, it must have been a shout of encouragement from heaven. It was proof she inherited not only his research, but his will as well. Takano couldn't help but feel a sense of destiny for attaining the rank of major.
おじいちゃん、私ようやくここまで来たよ。
Nobody else could hear her say that, but her grandfather in heaven could. That's what Takano believed. She'd only come so far. There were still a lot of things to do for this research to be recognized as great work. Otherwise, her grandfather won't become a god. She wouldn't become one either. You must become a god. That was in her grandfather's will. I was unable to do so. That line preceded it. It was her grandfather's dying wish. Her grandfather entrusted it to her. All of his research. A god can't be physically brought back to life. A god is made in the hearts of the people who remain alive. Her grandfather will live on in her heart. His exploits will be known to many, and all the scholars will fight to read his documents, to steal them from each other. And they will learn about Hifumi Takano, who began his research during the war. They will know that nobody understood him and that he ended up devoting his lonely life to his research. And finally, they will extol his grand achievement. Now, if it wasn't for the fact that we know that thousands of people will eventually die, it's quite sweet. Okay, so we're done. Oh my gosh, that was a lot of talking. That went a lot longer than I was expecting it to, but I hope you guys enjoyed this extra long episode. I'm curious about how this is going to go. I'm assuming like the first maybe half of it is just going to be going into Takano and how the research is going, how she meets Eri, and how she meets Tomatake, and I assume go descend further and further into madness with the research, and then maybe the other half will flip back over to like Keiichi and the group and trying to change fate. I gotta say, as interesting as going into Takano's backstory and everything is, I do miss the gang, and I hope we do get to see them sometime soon. We'll just have to see. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Bye. Special shout out to my top tier patrons: Namara Kito, Sparky, iCognito, Simon Rax, Mad Goldsmith, Harry Gazif, and Asborn Kennedy.